Horn, and we are very fortunate to have with us on the line Mike Banerian, and he is Communications Director for Michigan Rising Action. Mike Banerian, welcome to the Political Insider.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
Okay, I just want to ask you, what is Michigan Rising Action? We had your previous executive director, Tori Sachs, on the show maybe half a year ago, but she evidently has taken a new job with Michigan Freedom Fund, and you and a cohort have come in and taken over with Michigan Rising Action. Can you explain what Michigan Rising Action is for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty simple. We're an organization that's dedicated to holding liberal politicians in Michigan and any special interest group that supports them accountable. And in addition, we're also committed to advancing conservative principles by promoting good policy.
Okay, and Michigan Freedom Fund, what do they do?
You know, we have a lot of similar goals in that we are trying to advance the conservative cause, and we tend to push the more intellectual side of things. We want to work to ensure that both organizations of ours, that every citizen is given the most accurate and up-to-date information so that we can drive a balanced policy conversation in the state of Michigan. So a lot of similar goals in that we're pushing that conservative angle on things.
Well, this week you guys were pretty active. You announced that you had filed a complaint with the United States Internal Revenue Service against Governor Gretchen Whitmer about the way she paid for, or didn't pay for, at least in the beginning, her trip back in March to Florida to visit her ailing father. You also put out a report suggesting that the Whitmer administration significantly underreported COVID-19 deaths in nursing homes, and you also called attention to skyrocketing wait times at the Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson office, forcing her to testify in front of the House Oversight Committee and explain herself. Maybe you could just go through those three things, and starting with the IRS complaint, what's that all about?
Yeah, it's certainly been a busy week, and it's kind of sad. You know, it's not like we planned for these things. It just goes to show how this entire administration, not just Whitmer, but even going to Benson, has just been a disaster. And the IRS complaint in particular is interesting because we have new developments that came out yesterday, but up until this point, everyone's familiar with this Florida trip, broadly speaking, at this point. But Governor Whitmer had claimed that this flight was paid for by using 501c4 nonprofit funds. And Michigan Rising Action filed a formal IRS complaint calling for an investigation into the misuse of 501c4 funds for personal benefit. And she was already beginning to face an investigation by the FAA. And now she's fearing this IRS investigation that we had called for. And this new development from yesterday, she's desperately trying to reverse course now, saying that this flight is now being paid for by her campaign committee. And this now raises new questions over the legality of a campaign committee paying for the personal expenses of an individual. But the kind of the timeline and how this developed, we had this nonprofit, Michigan Transition 2019, that had come out and said that they had paid for this trip. And the governor had indicated this was a personal trip, which is not within the stated purpose of that nonprofit. And their payment for Governor Whitmer, therefore, was not really legal. So we filed that IRS complaint and exposed that. And the governor's attorney yesterday informed the House Oversight Committee that they're changing their story and they're using campaign committee funds. And this was clearly a decision made in the governor's inner circle to say that dealing with a Michigan campaign finance law violation was preferable to a federal investigation that she was facing. So I think they went judge shopping, and they conveniently found that Michigan's top elections official, Jocelyn Benson, would be determining a campaign finance violation.
Yeah, well, ironically, you filed that complaint about a campaign finance violation with Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, the same person who was forced to testify in front of the House Oversight Committee of the House of Representatives in Lansing about her alleged negligence over the past year in terms of wait times at the Secretary of State office for people trying to get business done there involving motor vehicles and everything else. This has nothing to do with elections. That's another responsibility for the Secretary of State. But this is motor vehicles, which may be more important to a lot of people than election law. So what's going on there anyway?
Well, I think this is one of those dinner table issues where most people have had this problem over the last year trying to renew tabs or get new license plates. The wait times at the Secretary of State have skyrocketed, and it's largely because Benson has implemented a year-long policy of appointment-only visits, and she's eliminated the previous system that provided a more reliable and accessible Secretary of State where you could go and walk in and get these appointments. And she's doubled down on this policy, and she said that she intends to make it permanent.
Well, so in other words, as far as she's concerned, nobody could ever just walk into a Secretary of State office, as they've done historically forever until she took office, and get their business done, however long it took once they got there. She's saying basically you got to make an appointment, right? But then didn't we hear a lot of complaints about, you try and make an appointment and sometimes they can't accommodate you very quickly and you have to wait weeks or months to get an appointment. And I think there was a lot of pushback, wasn't there, from legislators and not just Republicans, some Democrats saying, wait a second here, can't we at least have the option of walk-in in some situations where trying to make an appointment in advance is not practical? What's going on?
Yeah, that's what we heard out of the House Oversight Committee yesterday, which ironically she was late to. She was late for her own appointment to testify in front of this committee and made everybody else wait. I mean, it couldn't get a better example of what's going on with the Secretary of State than that. And she provided nothing but excuses on this. And she did, as you said, receive bipartisan pushback from Democrats and Republicans that while she kept saying this new system would work in theory, it's not working now. And in the meantime, shouldn't we be allowing people to walk in as they always have? And really, they got into a lot of different issues regarding the access to technology, because a lot of these appointments you have to book online. We have rural areas in Michigan that they don't have reliable internet. You have individuals in our aging population that don't really have that accessibility. And so these were all things that she acknowledged were problems, but just continued to double down and say, well, but this system is better. And as I had mentioned, the bipartisan pushback on that during this committee was, yeah, but it's not working. You say it's better, but it's not working. And she just didn't have answers. And it's disappointing. After a year of this, she doesn't have answers.
Well, do you get the impression when she left the committee meeting that she's changed her mind at all, or that the pushback from legislators convinced her, maybe I ought to have a walk-in option, or do you get the feeling she's just going to continue doing what she's been doing?
My impression was that she was trying to seem diplomatic and give the committee answers that they would be happy with, but I don't see the Secretary of State's office being any more proactive on this than they have been in the last year. I would hope that at this point our legislature would start to step in and push policies that force her hand, because Michiganders can't wait for this kind of development here. And we would hope that something would happen to fix these long wait times.
Yeah. We're going to have to take a break here, but we're going to come right back with Mike Banerian of Michigan Rising Action. Stay tuned.
This is MTN, and you're listening to The Political Insider with Bill Ballenger. Here's Bill.
We are back with Mike Banerian. He is Communications Director for Michigan Rising Action, and we talked about a couple of actions that Michigan Rising Action took this week. But I'd like to ask about a third, which is the suggestion that you made that the Whitmer administration significantly underreported COVID-19 deaths in nursing homes. You were kind of keying off the journalist Charlie LaDuff, who reported in Deadline Detroit that it appears Michigan, quote, wildly undercounts COVID deaths in its long-term facilities, unquote. So what did Michigan Rising Action make of that?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of us have been following this for the last year, where Governor Whitmer has refused to give answers to the people of Michigan over these devastating effects of her nursing home policy. And she ignored calls over the last year to stop mixing COVID-positive patients with uninfected populations of the elderly. So now this new report is suggesting that it could be worse than they had previously reported. And what we had done at Michigan Rising Action when this report had come out was, again, call on Attorney General Dana Nessel to investigate her handling, Whitmer's handling of COVID-related nursing home deaths. It was a pretty damning report, frankly, that came out of Deadline Detroit with Charlie LaDuff's article.
Yeah, the state officially attributes 5,600 out of Michigan's 19,000 COVID deaths. That's like a little over a quarter to long-term care facilities based on self-reporting from those facilities. However, according to LaDuff, new data suggests that the long-term care facilities related deaths, quote, may be 100% higher than the state reports, unquote. I mean, do you think there is any chance that Dana Nessel, who I think is pretty much on the same page with Governor Whitmer on just about everything, is really going to take your complaint seriously or your demand for an investigation seriously?
Well, I don't think she's going to investigate it. And to your point, though, about taking it seriously, it doesn't matter what political party you're a part of. When you have 5,600 deaths reported and potentially thousands more, that's something that everybody should be taking seriously. And the fact that Dana Nessel hasn't investigated up until this point and refused to a year ago when we knew there was a problem, it's despicable. And it goes to show very poor character out of our Attorney General and also obviously Governor Whitmer as well. But at the end of the day, I think all we're asking is a simple question. It's an important one. Why has the state not been collecting this information? Because this new data is suggesting that they're not tracking this info. And if we look at some of these new files coming out, we can trace them back to nursing homes. It's something the state could have done. And I don't see why we don't have an answer to the question, how many people died of COVID after catching it in a long-term care facility? The sad reality is that the state did give an answer for having a non-answer, and it's because they said it's because it's too time-consuming. And I don't think that's acceptable to give that answer to the people of Michigan, and we deserve to know the truth on this, not excuses.
Okay, Mike Banerian with Michigan Rising Action, I want to ask you about something else, and that's another self-inflicted injury suffered by Governor Whitmer this week, and that is her trip to an East Lansing bar called Land Shark this week, in which she was one of 13 reveling around a table in violation of her own order that no more than 6 should gather in such a situation. What about that?
Well, I'd love to say I was surprised, but unfortunately, she has a track record of breaking her own rules. And yeah, we have a situation where she refused to lift these restrictions on restaurants while other states have already done so. And these restaurants have seen massive fines for violations over the last year. And then she's seen maskless indoors with a large group of people, as you said, exceeding that 6-person limit. And the hypocrisy here is just nauseating at this point. Her administration has just been ripe with these stories of endless missteps and hypocrisy. And we've just seen a lot of it happen in the last year. And I think, unfortunately, it's happened so much that a lot of us have forgotten all of these missteps.
Another thing that came out this week was a survey of Capital Insiders by Michigan Information Research Service, MERS as it's called, with their polling firm Epic MRA, which found that other than the pandemic and roads, in the 2022 gubernatorial election, if Gretchen Whitmer runs again, a solid 48% plurality said she'd be, quote, most associated with not working in a bipartisan way with the legislature, unquote. Now, this survey consisted of, lobbyists, officials within state government, public relations firms, others who work in and around state governments, kind of inside the Capitol bubble audience of nearly 700 people who were surveyed. These are kind of real insiders, and they think there's a real problem for the governor in the sense that the public thinks she basically has just blown off the legislature for more than a year, if not 2.5 years. What does Michigan Rising Action make of all this?
Well, it makes sense. You have a governor. I mean, it makes sense that this is how they would view her, because you have a governor who's shown her true colors, shown her character, and it's been shown to be very poor. When you're looking to work with other people, you have to have a degree of honesty that you come to the table with. And everything she's done in the last 3 years has indicated that she's not doing things honestly. She's not making good faith efforts. And you could look at everything from Robert Gordon leaving as her health director and leaving with a confidentiality agreement and $155,000, not giving any reasoning to the legislature as to why he was leaving. Unemployment's been falling apart, and you had a similar situation where the head of unemployment was paid off $86,000 and under a confidentiality agreement. These are not decisions that are made or practices that people find very trusting. So how are you going to come to the table in a bipartisan way and work with the other side when you haven't been honest with anybody throughout the last 3 years? But what I think is important to highlight is that all of these stories that we could be listing here, it's not just a one-off situation. It's her governing style. And her pattern for governing is essentially hide information, hope you don't get caught, and then lie and say you're done talking about it when you do get caught. But I can tell you that she's not going to get away with it. Clearly, the voters don't view her as someone that should be leading our state at this point. And Michigan Rising Action is definitely going to continue to hold Governor Whitmer accountable for all of her actions here. And I do encourage everyone who's interested in following these scandals that are happening currently or other stories to reach out to us on Twitter. You could follow us at MI Rising Action, and you can also visit our website, MichiganRisingAction.org.
Yeah, Mike Banerian, another question that MERS Epic MRA asked was, in their survey, they say Gretchen Whitmer in the 2022 gubernatorial election, how do you think her handling of the pandemic will impact her chances at re-election? And in response, 54% said her handling of the pandemic would decrease her chances because people will see her efforts as too restrictive. Over half found that to be true. Only 35% felt that her handling of the pandemic would increase her chances because people will see her efforts as proper. And 10% said they would have no impact. How do you look at that?
Well, I think that the popular consensus at this point has been that she's overstepped. And then you look at situations with the nursing home, you look at her hypocrisy by going out to bars, flying down to Florida, her own administration officials taking vacations during COVID spikes, her husband this was a year ago this past week, trying to get his boat in the water by name dropping her. These are not things that are indicative of someone who has handled a crisis like this properly. And I would be shocked if voters didn't feel the same way and didn't vote against her in the coming election. Like I said before, it makes sense. A lot of this is just logical. Well, you can't get away with doing so much wrong and not have consequences.
Yeah, well, Mike Banerian, I could go on and on asking you questions, and, I could ask you, like, what other projects are you guys working on? But, the governor herself keeps giving you so much unsolicited material. All you have to do is sit there and wait for her to do something else wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, to keep an eye out on these future projects, MichiganRisingAction.org, or follow us on Twitter at MIRisingAction.
Okay, Mike Banerian, Communications Director of Michigan Rising Action. Thanks for being our guest.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We'll be back next week with still more.